This is Patrick W. Crawford of Moo-Ack Productions, and this is the content commentary for my most recent independent film, Flaw. Clearly, if you haven't seen it, there is little point in watching this commentary, so check it out here if you haven't already. Now, firstly, this is not a production workflow commentary. Originally, I was sure I was going to create one, but I've decided it's quite a lot of effort. Unless someone specifically wants to hear how I did any effects, or see a video on all the setup and behind the scenes of the process of creating Flaw, I probably won't make a commentary on that. At the very least, I will post behind the scenes pictures on my Facebook page for public viewing in the description below. Now, as a little background, I studied the novels 1984 and Brave New World in the 10th grade. I liked the idea of toying with perfection, and I often questioned those ideas further. One thought I had was how these perfect worlds, in fact dystopias, never really incorporated the aspect of uncontrollable nature. I figured that more than anything, this was the ultimate sign that these perfect worlds could not exist. Even though I wasn't previously a brick filmer or a stop-motion animator, I would have still likely gone into stop-motion with Lego bricks simply because of how fitting they were to this sort of world and story, such as the idea of perfection and happiness, the chance of misprint on these superficial printings, the fact that all the figures are exactly the same, and the idea that components of pieces can be broken down, literally in comparison to being a block in society. So, I set out to create this film, ultimately having in mind that it would be used by my school for further studies, as well as any other people interested in these topics. For such a reason, I created the film to be anything but shallow. There are numerous references and allusions to the ideas both mentioned and ignored by the aforementioned titles, subtly hinted at. For the film to be even better understood, I am creating this commentary so that these more subtle details that would otherwise be easy to gloss over can be recognized. As I could spend hours on this commentary, I'm going to break it down to a few short sections. That will be the use of time, the importance of nature versus society, class and knowledge, and finally imperfection and control. Starting with the use of time, one of the first things you might notice in the film is in the workspace that the clocks are not 12-hour based. Instead, they are divided into 8, in fact shifts. By dividing time into shifts, the implication is that inhabitants cannot worry about anything but what their time shift is for, their social service, the obligatory time allotted to improve and further their society. You can also notice the fact that Stein's shift is from 3 to 4. Later on in the film, when Stein wakes up after the cafe scene, it is shift 2, and when he is brought into custody and is outside the palace of the great designer, it is shift 3, the beginning of his shift, and when he leaves again, it is sometime past the end of his shift 4. This subtle progression helps to build the atmosphere of an upbeat and uptight society. The other point about the clock face you may have noticed is that there's no minute or second hand. Even within their job, they cannot be allowed to know how much time has passed and how much time is left to go for their shift. They can only abide by the overhead power, indicated by the shift changeover bell. The idea is that they aren't even inquisitive in what time it is, for they can only continue working. The implication is that these workers, mere blocks in society, already have a loose grasp on their existence because they cannot even gauge time for themselves. An extra subtle hint is brought into play in the designer's interrogation room. You probably didn't know this, but the ticking noise in the background was slowed to 50 to 75% of a normal second tick. This has the effect that seconds and time takes longer, as if fate was awaiting amendment or implementing. While I stated the clocks had no second or minute hand, it is not to say that time did not flow, because indeed it did. The fact that the perceived flow of time is altered, even in the room of the great designer, truly shows how disconnected the inhabitants of this world are to their own existence, and life ticking away. One thing to consider is that in a truly upbeat and progressing society, it is more likely to be attributed to the time running quickly at a faster than expected rate. with this case being the opposite, you can interpret it as a sign that the society isn't really progressing, but slowing down, running down, not advancing, just producing. Furthermore, the fact that the ticking sound effect is so subtle implies how fundamental it is to their lives. It is an underlying truth that they cannot hear or even recognize themselves. The ultimate idea of this distorted flow of time is that these colleagues take little consideration of their own time left to work and live, if you can call this living. Now on to the second section, we have nature versus society. Simply put, society equals perfect control, while nature equals no control, the complete antithesis. Water is the essence of nature, unpredictable, but of course it is also a symbol of life itself. Is this to say that they fear living? Or are they actually even alive? Or that society cannot function when individuals have the freedom to flow like water? Now, at the end of the film, there's a certain irony of Felix giving himself to the ocean. He's giving his life away, but he's also escaping from the control of that society to that of nature, to the water of life. Again, 42 is the generation where he discovered the meaning of life, that life is effectively non-existent in such a controlled society. Moving on, you probably will have noticed there was a large plant inside the office of the designer. The appearance is that it is live and well, a flourishing flower. But really, part of the plant has been turned around, a wilted flower that is being overlooked and hidden in the back corner of the room. In the same way, the society overlooks and blinds its citizens from the truth of its fallacy and its incapability to truly be in control. By being in the designer's office, it's drastically more symbolic because even in the closest reach of this dictator, a single bouquet of flowers cannot be kept alive and healthy. There is no life in this world, only work and production, and the illusion of progress. There are other places that I meant to have instances of nature, but to complete the film in time for this year, I didn't have time to actually implement them into the film. One of the places I meant to have an instant of nature was in the cafe scene. There was a little terrace that was supposed to have ivy hanging off of it. As well as this, the walkway out of the workstation was meant to be lined with regularly placed trees. The idea of this is meant to be a contradiction as it's taking the aspect of nature out of nature by making it regular and fitting into confined places in society. Moving on to the end of the film, we see the cliffs overlooking the water, the interface of the society and ocean, of control and freedom. These cliffs are near the ocean, a great body of water, and hence a great threat, as it cannot be controlled. There is great potential for color class members to be lost to the sea and henceforth not capable of being reused. Thus the sign indicating danger is there. Notice both the sign and the lighthouse are in ruin because they have not been used or kept up for a great period of time. From a time when the society was different, a time when people were one with nature and they actually lived. The lighthouse is also a reference to this time when the power of water and nature was maybe a threat but one endured. Ships would risk going in open waters, and the societies used to support and encourage this by creating such structures as the lighthouse which would guide them to safety. The current society structures does no such thing, and will not even allow the risk of losing resources or parts. The reference of the lighthouse is direct to Brave New World, as it likewise symbolized the end of the protagonist. The similar fate befalls Felix in this situation, but the lighthouse means more than just his end. It is symbolic of a time in the past where society was not controlled in such a way as this. As this is only the 42nd generation, it is implied that the society has been in existence or control for some few hundred years. This shows that the power of society is not absolute but confined in time, and the time before the society existed is haunting its current development, as much as they try to remove the time flow from daily work. As for the plants on the cliff, there are more than any other scene or location in the short film. These cliffs have the most natural features of flora and color. The plants are not regularly spaced but sprout randomly over the cliff, and in many places grass has been growing. One can now notice that there was no other location in the society shown where any green was shown in the form of grass, and all other forms of nature seen were confined by man-made features like a vase or a terrace, had I actually managed to complete the terrace in time. So this area is truly outside the reign of society, abandoned and feared, and it is of course here where Felix makes his escape. On to the next section, we have class and knowledge. As noted, there is a strong importance put upon the class structure. From the beginning, we can tell that Red is superior as they work on the upper levels of the factories. As in the intro scene, they even have the authority to control advanced computer machinery that is critical to the continuation of the society and its generations. Notice that, while the great designer does not specifically relate to any social class as he is superior, he is also adorned with this strong color. Then we have Blue, still fairly high up. They still have their own workspaces and they can even dine in the same places as the Red class members. Green is farther down. We can see them carrying containers from place to place, and they were not permitted to eat with the higher color class members. Then Gray, of course, was the lowest. They were doing the most mundane things, like opening cans to pour out the rubble of deconstructed citizens into the furnace. Notice one was also the service waiter at the cafe. One detail to notice above all is that class can be also identified by the color of pants, as the higher color classes are of lighter colors, Red having white trousers, and lower classes of darker colors, the gray color class having black ones. This serves to state that the distinction of class is paramount to make the society function, as the distinction is omnipresent. Despite this, it's important to notice that they are all, for example, having the same facial expression. In the production phase, it can be assumed that these figures already have their class assigned upon being built, as the color of their torso and legs are pre-built and assembled. There's no choice in the matter, and there's no way to advance or go to a different class. This helps to divide the classes further, but aside from those arbitrary colors, they are truly exactly the same. This shines through in subtle and unconscious instances, such as the common phrase of referring to any other being as a colleague. The only one who says anything different is of course the designer, as he is not just another worker, but the mastermind who oversees and, quite literally, designs and inspects every aspect of the society. The phrase he uses, "my creation," seems tender and almost father-like, as if he's marveling at his accomplishment of creating a being devoid of life, a mindless minion. Naturally, this would be superficial like everything else in the society, as he is simply trying to coax or trick Stein and everyone else to stay in their place, behave as the designer instructs them to behave. This begins to hint at the failure of society and the truth behind the esteemed perfect control I'll cover in the next section. While it is easy to assume the higher classes have more knowledge, they are hardly completing more complicated and advanced jobs. It can be assumed that from the start of each life, instructions on what to do or how to build have been given, with the expectance to obey. No personal thought or intelligence used in their area of production. It should be understood that there literally is no difference between any of them but their color. It is all a ploy of the great overseer to make them believe in the structure of society, because history has certainly shown that a society cannot exist without social structures. In one way, since the classes are truly no different in capability, it means that the society cannot continue on forever. Now on to the final section of imperfection and control. I previously mentioned the impossibility to control nature. It can only be kept at bay outside the realms of the society's borders. This means that the earthquake is the ultimate instance of how nature cannot be controlled, as great devastation is caused by the earthquake, killing and injuring many, revealing the perfect world to be not so perfect. Something devastating like an earthquake cannot be avoided, and henceforth such a natural disaster breaks the perceived cycle of life in the city. What the earthquake more symbolically does is temporarily tear the cloth of lies that rests upon the face of this world, allowing anyone who peers in a glance at the horrible structure that the society is built upon. The police system of the world can only try to avert the all-seeing eyes from what has more plainly been revealed. Everything is fine, all is well, you are all happy, everything is perfect, order is maintained. This is continued in the background as Felix goes through the realization of his mortality and imperfection, his no longer perfectly shaped face. The lights projected in the megaphone overhead become stark and clear at this time of absolute ruin. The irony of these words are most clear at this instance because the devastation is directly in view, but this furthermore implies that all other instances of instruction or explanations are equally lies. On a last note for the earthquake, I included an instance of foreshadowing of the event, once again to demonstrate the fragility of the society. When Stein is walking back to his room in twilight, towards the bridge's underpass, the same sound effect of a helicopter can be heard over the wind, implying the end point where the Antwerpers in the helicopter tried to suppress those caught in the disaster. The meaning of this foreshadowing is the failure of society is inevitable, and its lack of control will be revealed. There is a definite cyclical nature that regards the workings of this place. From the introduction to the ending credit scene, the process of recycling is shown, the way each individual is composed of elemental parts and pieces that are broken down to be reused as a foundation of the next generation. One symbolical implication of this is that each new generation is comprised of the flaws of all other previous generations, being created from the exact same matter. Furthermore, the creation of each new generation is very mechanical, which leads to little human interaction aside from the mindless lever pulling. This means that there is no chance for advancement in human mind or intelligence, as nothing is being improved upon in each new generation. It's just the same production assembly line. By being such a mechanical process, it also leaves room for the mechanical failure or the inability of the machine to always create perfectly replicated figures. This is demonstrated by the single brick sucked up with the deconstructed green class members shown at the end of the film. Regardless of whether or not this piece was a part of another figure or from a building fixture, it goes into the factory to be melted down with the other deconstructed citizens all the same, to be melted down into a more fundamental, malleable state. In the factory, we see the individual pieces falling onto the conveyor belt leading to the furnace, and one piece bounces off, falling into the gutter. As the film is circular, we can follow this individual stud and the introduction of the film as the piece that falls down on top of the machine that controls the printing of faces on the figureheads. This, of course, leads to a momentary malfunction that created Stein's slightly distorted face. What this means to say is that, while any random factor could have caused the machine to misprint like this, it was ultimately caused by such a small and fundamental building block, a piece that is of the society itself. This stud or block caused this revolutionary character that would identify his difference from everyone else in the world. Henceforth, the fundamental piece of society is what brings realization of the impossibility of control on the society. With the cyclical nature implied, it can be understood that such an occurrence of an error can happen at any generation being created, to which most are simply deconstructed by order of the great designer. One other feature of the society is the use of ignorance as a mechanism for control. At the beginning of the film, as Stein exits his place of social service, he explains to Felix how little anyone knows of their work. The irony of this is that Stein is clearly joining together pieces of the machinery that reduces any structure figure down into a state of elemental blocks, the deconstructor. This is the primary mechanism to erase or remove kinks in society. In a very ironic way, Stein is constructing the machine of his own end. While he is killed by the falling overpass of the earthquake, it can be assumed that he is ultimately reduced to rubble like the other green color class member, as the various Antwerpers on the ground reduce any and everyone that has been injured or killed, the attempt to eradicate plainly visible Flaw. It is also this machine that is used to incite momentary fear in the citizens of the world, whether or not they understand the emotion itself, demonstrated previously with Tristan 39 Green, who gives off a great deal of fear automatically, being confronted with the deconstructor. He, as with every other citizen of the society, knows what it means to disobey, although they otherwise think they are perfectly happy, because this is the way they have been programmed to be. moving to the top of the social scale, and as the overseer of control and manipulation of this dystopia, the great designer says he has to be different from everyone else. As Stein points out, it's its own contradiction, the fault to your own system. The great designer says he is different because he needs to in order to rule. In other words, the society in its own nature is destined to fail, as its own citizens are too brainwashed and continue it on. Previously, the great designer regarded others as my creation. As I stated, he is trying to make himself superior to all others so that he has this fatherly overlord sort of appeal. At the end of this scene, though, there's a certain irony, as the direct quote is, "Go forth and change, my fellow colleague." This is the one moment that Stein is recognized on the same level as the designer, being a fellow colleague, not his creation like in the beginning. Is this to say that the designer has realized Stein is no different from himself? They both are different to the rest of the people in the society. They do not glaze over and accept the given commands. The "go forth and change" that the great designer says to Stein is to coax him into suppressing himself to become one with society again, but it can be understood in a more subtle way that Stein will lead the realization of the dystopia that the society really is. While it is ultimately Felix who realizes this, it is because Stein was crushed and killed in the earthquake that Felix begins to realize and question his own mortality. This is the end of my content commentary. I greatly appreciate your time to view both this explanation and the original film itself. I have summarized the major points that I felt were most critical to getting a deeper understanding of what I meant by creating this film. I hope this has helped to enlighten your understanding while provoking you in a thoughtful way to consider what constitutes our history in the real world, and the forces that shape our present and future. If you have any further questions, comments, or observations, I will gladly respond. Originally, I stated that I created this film as an aid to understanding for students attending my high school when studying 1984 in Brave New World. While I did not spend much time pointing out the paralleled ideas and allusions to either film, there is more to look for in that regard. Given my original intention, I would gladly allow any school or affiliation to use or show the original film and/or this commentary without my direct assent. Once again, this is Patrick W. Crawford of Moo-Ack Productions. If you want to follow more of my work, on YouTube I will only place my most polished work or 3D stereoscopic films that otherwise would not be viewed correctly. For the rest of my animations, photography, and editing, as well as the behind-the-scenes pictures for this film, go to facebook.com/TheDuckCow, as in the description below. Once again, thank you.